So I've missed out on $140,000 of just the market gets more expensive. I didn't do anything for it. It just happened.
Right, and that makes sense, right? Because you talk to your grandparents and they're like, 60 years ago, that house was $31,000.
Yeah.
And now it's how much?
Like 300 grand.
Yeah. And so that's what they're talking about. You're going to be saying that same thing. You always loved that house that you drove past, and you remember when it was on the market and it was only $100,000, and then you're at retirement age and you're like, man, that place used to be $100,000. When I was younger, it was $300,000. That's going to be you someday. I'm just letting you know that those numbers have just continued to increase. That's just the way inflation works.
Wow. Okay, so that's one way.
That's one way. So that's 3,000 of the 8,000, right, that we were talking about.
Right.
The rest of that is in the principal pay down. So you're making a monthly payment to the owner of the property if you're a renter, or to the mortgage company if you're a purchaser, right?
Yeah.
But part of what the payment that when you're making your mortgage payment that goes to is the balance of your mortgage, right?
Right.
That goes
the $100,000.
Yeah. So $300 a month is going toward the balance of that $100,000 that you borrowed. So just the basics. I'm not gonna get. I'm not.
Yeah, don't get too deep. Don't lose us.
Deep into the amortization schedule, but roughly $300 a month goes into that. So that's $6,600. Just talking about that $300 a month and the $3,000 of appreciation for the year. So, and that just, it costs you that by giving that money away to someone else. And so somebody might say, and he and I talked through this too, because he said, well, Dave Ramsey says that you should do this and that you should never have debt and that you should do all, and he said, talk me through that, walk me through that. And I said, well, Dave Ramsey is this really super smart guy. So I'm not discounting anything that Dave Ramsey is saying, but I'm saying that you should look at this from the numbers only. And if you borrow this money and leverage the money that somebody else is willing to lend to you for your benefit, if you spend that $3,500 to borrow the $100,000 on that property, it'll be worth $240,000 in 30 years, and the money you would have spent in rent, starting at $900 a month.
Yeah, that's what I was curious. What, like, if I'm renting it, how much am I paying into it?
Yeah, if you're renting it, you're going to spend $365,000 over 30 years.
So,
hang on.
Oh my God.
If you rent for $900 a month at a 3% appreciation rate, so your rent is going to increase as the value increases. That's just the way that goes.
Yeah.
So if you stay in that same property for 30 years, it's going to cost you $365,000. Wait, Dave Ramsey says, but you don't want to pay the interest on a 30-year mortgage. The interest on a 30-year mortgage for a $100,000 house will be $65,000. So you're paying $65,000, which is a lot of money in interest, don't get me wrong, but you could have spent it in rent for $365,000, or you could have paid $65,000 in interest, which is tax deductible, by the way. We won't get into that, but it's tax deductible. And at the end of 30 years, you own that. So if you rented it, you spent $365,000 so that you didn't have to fix the leak under the sink, right? Or when the toilet backed up, because that's the convenience of it. So $365,000 over 30 years for the convenience of not having to make those little fixes. At the end of 30 years, you spent $165,000 total on the house that you bought for $100,000, because you paid $100,000 plus the $65,000 in interest. So you paid $165,000 and you rented for $365,000. Plus, you have a $240,000 asset. The math there, if you're not following along, is $440,000. That's the difference. You are ahead of the game, $440,000 at the end of 30 years if you buy that $100,000 property as opposed to rent it for 30 years.
Renting is essentially, but based on those numbers, renting pays double in the long run.
Yeah.
$365,000 on a $100,000 home, that's what you're paying when you're renting. So it's just way more expensive to rent. Even if your monthly outgo, it's a little bit less renting. So that's how your buddy, even renting at a discounted price, you're missing out. You're spending so much more money than if you just bought the home in the first place. That makes totally sense. So that's why, like, the biggest mistake you can make really is to rent.
It's a huge mistake. And on a $100,000 mortgage, it's a $440,000 mistake.
Well, let that sink in.
I understand the value of renting. I understand that people are in transitionary periods.
It's great,
And sometimes you need a rental, and that's why I said in the last video we talked about or 2 videos ago, we talked about how the Robert Kiyosaki model actually even says that it can make more sense to rent the house you're in and use your money to buy investment property because of the way the balance sheet works. And so I'm not saying never ever rent. If you rent, you're a fool. I'm not saying that at all. But what I'm saying is that you shouldn't bury your talents. If you're in a position where you can leverage someone else's money and borrow that money, you should do it. You shouldn't sit on it. You should be smart about it, and you should consider all of the working pieces of it and your current situation, of course. But in the long run, the math is basic, like Dave Ramsey says. The numbers don't lie. The reality is $440,000 is what it will cost you over a 30-year period. And is it worth, can I ask you the question, is it worth $440,000 to you in 30 years? It's up to you. It's up to you. I say you should be making choices now and plans now to make sure that you're $440,000 closer to retirement when 30 years comes around than you are by renting right now. There's so much to this, right? And I didn't want to get caught up in the numbers. I don't want to get caught up in the details. And so we'll make another video next week and we'll go through borrowing money and getting someone else to pay it back. But the big thing is, borrow the money, don't borrow the house. Borrow the money, don't borrow the house. That's a principle that you need to ingrain in yourself and be something that you're thinking about when you're thinking about real estate in general. If you're thinking about a rental and you're thinking, I just signed a lease, well, good. You're in a position now to really be focused on how you're going to move forward into the future to borrow the money and not borrow the house. Hey, thank you so much for watching this video. I have a ton of content that I'm creating and I want to share it with you. And so if you haven't watched any of my other videos yet, if you're just getting started, then check out this video and this video. They're both really good places to start, and hopefully you're going to get more and more information here than anywhere else. Hopefully you find this valuable, and if you do, make sure that you like these videos, you subscribe, and you hit the bell to turn on the notifications so you get notified when new stuff comes out. Thanks again, and we'll see you soon.